just a little bit of housekeeping for everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. I want to start by saying this is not financial advice of any shape or form. What we're going to talk about today is just generic in nature. We are three property investors just basically discussing our different opinions on different properties and just kind of giving you guys ideas on maybe the things that we would look for, what we do like, maybe what we don't like, and questions, that you may want to ask yourself if you are interested in buying properties at the moment. We've got a couple of examples which hopefully somewhat resemble what's happening in the market. But if you guys have any questions throughout, what we are talking about today, just feel free to chuck them in the chat box, and I will do my best to make sure that I can see all of them. We've got Nic Irvine here, who's a property investor. And we've also got Mark Honeybone, who's a property investor and principal of Property Ventures Real Estate. And I am Ryan Smuts from Chris Peterson Mortgages. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. What we want to do tonight, and basically the format, it's reasonably informal. What we want to do is look through a few properties, give you guys our opinion, and maybe figure out, what's good or bad about each property. Give you an idea on maybe what we would look at in terms of negotiating, what things could help us maybe get a better price as a buyer. We all know at the moment it's more of a buyer's market, and so just getting a bit of an understanding on maybe what sort of tactics we could use for certain properties that might be favourable. And then also looking at things from maybe a financing side and understanding, the numbers a little bit better on the properties that you're looking at and basically what to look out for and consider. So other things we'll also probably discuss is just, on what terms we would buy the properties, and also, if we did buy them, what we would do to them. So probably to get the ball rolling, the property that we're looking at initially is at number 1 and 2 /45 Hogan's Road in Glenfield. This property is on a single title. If you look it up on the likes of RPNZ or which is basically CoreLogic, or any other property data website, you'll find it as 45 Hogan's Road. There's a property next door which is 45A, or 2/45, which is a completely different title, and I believe it's this thing here at the back. So completely separate, but this is a dual income property. So maybe to get the ball rolling, Mark, do you want to jump in with any comments that you do have about this property in Glenfield?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Well, just before I start, I guess, with any of the properties, and just a reminder of what I always ask the agent, obviously not an agent, but ask the agent of the properties a few things. What's the motivation of the vendor? And especially in the market we're in now, and we're going to be in for the next few years, is, what's their motivation? Why are they selling? Have they found anything to buy yet? And when do they want to settle? Because I think for that, straight away, that answers quite a lot of questions, I guess. How hard you can, negotiate, and what sort of things you might want to ask or get in there, and depending what you're trying to do with the property, it gives you a bit of and generally the agent will tell you what it is. They're obliged to, there's no reason why they can't unless the vendor said they can't. So that's just for all properties generically. So just to start off with, but I know I've got quite a bit written down here, so maybe I just go ahead and you guys challenge me or join in as we go. In no particular order, I've just written down a few things. Obviously, it's auction unless, I did notice one is unless sold prior to. So anyone can come with an offer any time and take it off the market. You can think of everything tonight apart from what I've got to say about them. Is interesting enough, I know everyone has got access to homes.co.nz. Now, Homes, we've also got access to Property Smarts, which is, as Ryan says, CoreLogic. Now, for me, that's really valuable. And interesting enough, go back a year when the market was going like that, you looked on Homes, and Homes was lower than the market was. And I never really see CoreLogic back then, or Property Smarts, as I call it. When it's back going sort of downwards a wee bit, I've noticed the last 6 months now, homes.co.nz has been a little too high for what the places are actually worth. And Property Smarts, in my opinion, are really accurate on the whole, generically speaking, in Auckland, for what I'm looking at. And there's a reason for that. The reason simply is Homes data is usually 6 weeks or 8 weeks old, and Property Smarts or CoreLogic data is sometimes 4 days old. Just on that note, for those who don't know, for real estate agents, in our office on the 3rd of every month, we put all our unconditional sales in the system to REINZ. from the last month. So on the 4th of July, we'll see sales that haven't even happened yet, but went unconditional on the 30th of June. So that's really valuable, and that just explains a wee bit why
there's a difference.
Some of the difference. So at the moment, because the market's sort of going down a little bit, I guess, at the moment still, Property Smarts is way more accurate than Homes, in my opinion. So there you go. Bit of
the data's a lot closer to real time. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I'm sort of trying to tell sort of many people that at the moment, because it's really relevant right now, and especially if you don't want to, if you want to buy a bargain, Homes is probably a wee bit higher than you want to pay, generically speaking, of course.
Yep.
Anyway, back to this property. So in this case here, just for example, Homes says it's worth about 1.36 mil, and between 1.31 and 1.4. Property Smarts, interestingly, says it's 1.156 mil. So they're saying it's about 180,000 less than Homes says, but a big range, 1.08 to 1.22. So, and for me, that range is sometimes really big, too big in Property Smarts. That gives me a $200,000 range to go. If it's crap and needs a whole lot of renovations, it's on the lower side. If it's in really good nick, it's on the higher side. So they're just things that I look at when I'm looking at properties. It's not the be all and end all. You've still got to look at all the properties in the street and see, what they're selling for, if they're above, below CV, and what do they look like, sort of thing. So but that's important. So that just gives me a guideline, I guess, of where to start. Just on these ones though, they've had a renovation. They're probably I hope the person something that's not online, but as I used to do in South Auckland, they're probably a little bit cheaper quality reno. It's been done okay.
It looked to me like one was renoed a lot more than the other, or even the other one may not have been almost at all.
Yeah, if you keep going through, actually, there's one, that photo right there. Stop there. Go that one, the kitchen. You can see the kitchen on the left. Some of that stuff's been done. That's a really interesting picture right there. On the right, you've got the old tiled thing. It looks like there's a few tiles missing just there right there. So they haven't done that. And the far end interests me because there's some plumbing there. Is it for a dishwasher? Is it for a washing machine?
Washing machine, I think.
It's like a washing machine.
Probably a washing machine. If it's neither, it's got the hot and cold. If it's neither, is it, have they moved things around, or, have they moved plumbing? Has plumbing been consented? I don't think they have moved the plumbing here. It's just they just haven't got a washing machine sitting there, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But there's those sort of questions when you look at any property, has the plumbing been moved? You can renovate a kitchen. You don't need renovation. You don't need any certificates for an electrician or a plumber unless you've obviously moved to change the plumbing or electrical work. But that's an interesting picture there. It shows the good and the bad. They haven't done a high spec renovation, so that just goes in your calculations then for maintenance. Is it going to need a new kitchen again in 15 years or 5 years, sort of thing. So those things are quite important. Is it Healthy Homes approved because it's the age it is. It's important to know that if you're going to rent it out, which obviously we're all probably going to do on this call. What have I got? It's just one thing, because it's on its own title. One thing you may look at doing in the future is maybe separating them to two titles. And if you are, maybe check if that's your only goal you want to do, maybe you're a flicker or renovator, then obviously check where the services are. They separate services to both properties. They're possibly not. I actually don't know.
These they do have separate. They've mentioned in the listing the separate power and water meters. So
they probably they probably are. So that's a good thing for if you want to do something in the future. As you said, cool. Thanks for that. As you said, one looks better than the other. One has got no window coverings. One has got heat pumps. That looks good.
Yeah.
So they look okay. Regardless of how it's been renovated, it looks okay for tenants. Most tenants will like to move in there. You would think it's got a heat pump. It looks good, better than most. I sort of said that. The deck's fine, obviously. The other deck, I'm not sure whether you need to. Oh, it's not a cross lease, is it? I was thinking about that one there, whether it need to go on the plan to title plans, but you're probably okay with that. But just with the calculations, it's not rented at the moment, so they haven't got an actual rental figure. So important. So talk to a property manager, and why I say talk to property managers, they know what the market is right now, and price-wise, and they also know what the market is in tenant-wise, whether there's abundance of them or not. And And like the property market, it goes up and down, and when you're in, day out, you see it closer than anyone else. So there's quite a few things to get the appetite going, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think looking at the rental figures, one of the pros I see with the property like this, if you do buy something, let's say, and it's got a couple of incomes, is if one of them are vacant, you've still got rent from one. Whereas with single dwelling type properties, if you do lose the tenant, you lose all of your rent. So potentially a bit of a benefit there. It's probably a bit more of a cash cow than maybe another property that could cost some things, somewhat similar, but it doesn't have, dual tenancy or, such a high yield. So something more potentially attractive from an investment point of view. And I didn't think of potentially splitting them out into their own titles like you did, Mark.
Okay, and you can possibly see from one of the decks there, it's actually in a real gully of Hogan's Road. So it would be quite a damp, cold area, which would be something to be considered in looking at, like visiting it in the early evening, because it would lose a lot of sun.
Okay.
As well, yeah.
I guess that one's got the higher deck too. The other one's got the lower deck, which could potentially cause some problems or issues.
I wonder if it's going to let me. There you go. There we are here.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. It goes down. Yeah.
Yeah. But overall, I mean, good area. You've got a lot around it in terms of things like malls, schools, that sort of stuff.
Totally.
Yeah. Mark, CV is 1.25. How much do you rely on CV? I mean, that's somewhere in the middle of the figures you were spitting out from Homes and RP and Z. How much do you, I suppose, as an agent, rely on that, and obviously as a purchaser when you're looking at property these days? Because not too long ago, obviously, the new CVs came out in Auckland.
Yeah, well, I always have an argument. I mean, not an argument, it's a very good discussion about 7 years ago with one of my staff here in Auckland, and she just totally, well, everything into CVs. CVs was a be-all and end-all. I says, well, CVs don't really mean that much. And she was going, oh, they've gone up $300,000, so the price is going to go up. And I said, no, that's not what it's like, although a lot of people do think that. But in saying that, it is important, and I still do, in saying what I just said, I do use it every day, and I just listing a place at the moment down in Takanini, and one of the first things I've done my thing to get the range where I think it's worth, and then just looking in that street and going, okay, here's 20 places in the street or in the area, or 5 in the street that sold in the last 6 months. How are they in comparison with CV? And usually, this is a pretty common factor there. There might be 50,000, 30,000 below, or there might be whatever. You might get the odd one that's sold 200k above for whatever reason, but there's usually a reason for that. I use the CVs are still really important, and that's for me just when I'm looking at other properties, what's happening. And this is probably not as important on this one here because it's a different property. It's not a regular 3-bedroom home on its own section, or a 4-bedroom home on its own title. It is on its own title, but there's 2 homes, so that's, I guess, a wee bit harder to compare. Yeah, so that does make the price really hard to go there. So it's work out roughly what you think it's worth, but do the figures what it works for you as an investor, and work out what it is, see where it comes to, and then keep that in the back of mind. Put in the what you think a regular 3-4 bedroom home, and this 4-bedroom home in this case here would be, and start negotiating.
I think one of the other benefits with property like this, of course, is if you did want to get into weren't sure on whether you want to get into the rental market or owner-occupied market, it's the kind of thing where you could move into one and rent out the other, which will help offset your costs. It's not necessarily a traditional home and income type property, but it absolutely could be used for the same purpose. A couple of other points that I put down were just probably more things like, the size of the land doesn't allow a huge amount of development potential. So really probably the most use that I think you're likely to get out of a property like this is basically what you could do to it as it stands, which might be, as we commented on renovations, tidying up things a little bit more than they have been, or at least factoring in some sort of maintenance budget. And then also, as Mark pointed out, potentially seeing if you can subdivide it and if there's any sort of benefit there. Something else, which I'm definitely no expert on, but obviously something we look at as a property investor, is there's now quite a disparity between having an existing property and a new build property. And just being aware that, of course, if you do buy this now, the interest deductibility sort of rules are very, very different, when you're buying an existing property to a new. And it becomes even more important when you are looking at a market like the one we've got with really, really high interest rates. I think this was quite a big change for property investors in general, even when you go back to, let's say, 12 months ago or 18 months ago where rates were in the twos. But as rates start to creep up, to 4, 5, 6s, even in some cases, that tends to make things a whole lot worse. And so you'll want to try and understand from a numbers point of view what that looks like for you if you are paying interest on a mortgage and not all of it is deductible. So it really just depends, if you're able to make those cash flows work. And if you're running backwards, otherwise known as negative gearing, which a lot of property investors were happy to do in bigger town centres in the past, you'll want to make sure that there is an upside on the other side. And if there's not too much that you can do to the property in the future, then it may not be the kind of thing that you want to be looking at long term. So just get a real understanding. And if you need to, have a chat with your accountant on how that may look for you when you are considering buying existing properties. I'm absolutely not saying, not to look at them. One of the key benefits for investors in the past with existing properties is the ability to add value, basically renovate and recycle your deposit and move on quickly. So that may still work and it may be absolutely fine, but you'll just want to know that you can absolutely make the cash flows work, because at the moment, that's probably going to be the determining factor on whether or not you can keep the property long term.
Yeah, certainly thrown a different dimension, that hasn't it, with property investing, the non-tax deductibilities moving forward.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Any other comments on this one, guys?
It definitely has room to add value, though. I don't think you would have much trouble getting tenants, especially with that off-street parking, those garaging facilities as well. So,
yeah, no, certainly, good areas, you said. It's good, good working class area with usually good tenants in there, and as you said before, the one thing you can, probably a lot of investors wouldn't, unless you're a first-time investor. If I was young right now, which isn't a long way from that, but I would have probably started doing that right now. Now, this one here's a great one to move in yourself and rent it out. And as an agent selling it, we've got one we're just doing in Swanson similar to this. And one of the things we're going to be pushing is home buyers to buy it and rent the other one out to help pay the mortgage. So that's and even this one here, I think you'll know, Ron, is it $875 or something? The first home buyer grant you can get. Yeah. So this is obviously more than $875, but with $875, and then you can use the $600 or whatever the rent is on the other one. That might really help with finance for them as well. But so if you're a young investor, maybe this could be a great first one to get into. And remembering we're 40% LVR at the moment, it might go lower one day in the next months or so.
Yeah. And there's also other financing options to get in with less than a 20% deposit as well for investors. And so it's just a matter of trying to figure out, if it does work. But as you say, Mark, if you go in as an owner-occupier, you can rent out one of them. It's still treated as an owner-occupied property by all banks. So basically, you'll only need a 20% deposit in that situation. And with each of them being 2 bedrooms, you can probably rent out, the bedroom and the one that you live in as well. So you may end up getting pretty close to the rental appraisal, even though you get a place to occupy as well. So I think there's lots of benefits with the property. It's just figuring out, from an add value perspective, if there's enough in there for you, and just trying to make it obviously work. And I agree in terms of the location. I love the shore. I'm from the shore, so you're preaching to the choir there, Nick.
All good.
Cool. So I will move on in that case to the next property. So this is 233 St. John's Road in St. John's. This is a leasehold property, and there's an offer for vendor finance. So it's probably worth us chatting about, leaseholds and things like that. Just a couple of things. Obviously, with this one, there's a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom house, and a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom minor dwelling. So dual income here. I suppose the key thing and something that always screams out when I look at leasehold properties, I don't know about you guys, but obviously what the rates in the ground lease end up being, but also how soon it ends up being renewed. And I can discuss a little bit about the financing side of that as well. But maybe if you guys want to just jump in and give your initial thoughts on this property in particular, but maybe leasehold properties in general.
Well, that property in particular, I mean, that lease is coming up pretty soon. So that would be a bit of a red flag for me. I mean, you never know, right, what it's going to go to.
Yeah.
And I guess if you're buying it now, there's possibly no way you're going to sell it and make money on it before that lease comes up again, no matter really what you do to it. So to me, that's a huge risk. Personally, I would stay away from that. But then again, you know, like if people are prepared to take the risk, it's a pretty easy foot in the door because it's quite such a low value or low price.
It's a nice looking place with the photos there.
Yeah, it's beautiful property.
A lot of St John's properties leasehold. Obviously, is a lot of the suburb is, so it's a common thing. It's not a common thing. What I haven't done, I'm not sure you check, Ryan, is who actually owns the property. I haven't actually checked that far.
I hadn't looked, so it was a company.
Yeah, okay. Because some of the ones around there you can actually buy back at a certain time. I sort of looked at it probably about 10 years ago around St John's. I did look at that, how you could do it, and asked a few times the agents. It was all seemed too hard at the time, but there's a possibility. So one of the things is you could do, buy the investment for May 25, 56k as it said. Yep. That's what the lease is. Property management, I did on the rent is about 6,000 if you did that, and that's what I left off. Left a $300,000 purchase price. You're going to be some interest on that, isn't there?
Just a bit.
I guess so. On that, it will depend what it is. It won't be a heck of a lot because you probably have to give, I don't know, how much do you have to pay? 50% or?
If you're looking at leasehold, the absolute best case scenario you're going to get is going to be a 50% loan.
Okay.
Something for people to be aware of, where banks are quite cautious, and this is probably why you'll see this on many leasehold properties in general, but particularly ones that have a lease coming up quite soon, is banks get very, very wary about this. And so because they're not sure in terms of what the number will be, like nobody is, they typically tend to tie the loan term to the remaining term of the lease. So in this case, you've got a month under 3 years to go. So if you did take out a loan, and let's say it was 50%, first of all, you're not going to get interest only on a leasehold property if you're going to get a bank loan. In addition to that, if you do get the loan approved and the bank is willing to do 50%, what you're going to be doing is paying off 150 grand over the next just under 3 years. So from a cash flow point of view, you're paying, of course, the 56k that Mark mentioned, but you're also paying something like 50 grand a year plus interest in mortgage costs and obviously principal and interest.
Right.
So the way that people tend to do this will be looking at obviously vendor finance sort of arrangements. Or in other cases, what they will do is if you've got equity in one of your other residential properties, then you can use that equity to be able to buy properties like this, provided the numbers work. So, if from a cash flow point of view, you can support this as far as the bank's harsh calculations, then they may be willing to give you a standard residential loan on one of your other properties. By and large, many people have the same sort of opinion as you, Nick, in terms of properties like this, and I'm exactly the same. It's not something that I would get into just because the risk is so massive. I've done a few of them over time, and the ones that I have done have been scenarios like the one I mentioned, where people have equity, they've got a whole lot of cash flow, they are probably towards the later stages of their life where they don't have much debt and they have higher cash flow from, let's say, their property portfolio. And these properties often tend to be, there's a lot of them all over the viaduct. They tend to be in amazing locations and really, really nice and well looked after properties, but typically are reserved for people who almost don't care about the cash flow at all. Who can make it work either from a financing point of view or can just kind of throw in the cash to sort of make the numbers work. If you're looking at vendor finance, I suppose you've got to ask the question of, how much are they willing to give? If they're going to give you the whole amount or very close to, then you may want to start asking questions around, why they're looking to do that. Are they in a tight situation, or do they know something you don't about what's going to happen with the lease? And as Mark said, maybe having a discussion with the owners of the land and trying to find out if it is ever going to be up for purchase, and if maybe you can get an option to buy it in the future. that you can exercise at a time that suits you, or if it's never going to happen, are you still happy to buy the property given its location, given its costs, and obviously looking at that sort of thing. So I think the key thing with leasehold is just remember, best case you're going to get 50%, if at all, and then it'll just be obviously calculating your payments over a very, very short loan term. I mean, 3 years is shorter than a car loan, so if you want to pay 150 grand off that fast and you've got the cash flow to do it, then by all means go for it. But for people in that situation, typically they don't need the loan; they're happy to cover it with cash.
Better buy a second-hand Lamborghini, mate, paying it off over 3 years.
You probably have a similar amount of problems.
Yeah. I mean, there's horses of courses, and I like trying to find the bright side of every property, even though I'd never buy a leasehold myself. But we sold one similar stats to this in the viaduct about 2 years ago. Hamish sold one, but if you had 300,000 cash, and 300,000 cash isn't a lot these days. You need that to. You need more than that to buy the last property we saw. You need $450,000 cash to buy that, or equity in your home to buy that. So if you're sitting there, is there someone a wee bit older or whatever, and maybe they've got some money to play in, you look at the interest in the bank the last few years has been about 1% on a good day. You're getting, if you do the figures here, if you have your 300,000 cash, it's earning. I've worked out at the 868. They said for the 4-bedroom, and I put 600 down for a 2-bedroom. You're earning $76,000 cash or more than that, and with a property manager looking after it, it's costing you $62,000. So it's over $14,000 pre-tax cash flow, less vacancy and maintenance. So that for $300,000, that's probably not bad.
Almost 3%.
And the things are, as I said, you need to look at the lease and see in May 25 what's going to happen. And the documents might say it can't go up any more than 5% or whatever, which is 3% or whatever it might be. It might be it's going to go up to this. It doesn't say what it is in the ad. It's going to go up to, it might already be predetermined what's going to happen. Or there may be nothing, and some of them do have nothing, and it's open for them. And that's the dangerous thing about leasehold, where it can go from 30,000 to 50,000. Who knows? This might have been 20,000 8 years ago, for all we know.
Yeah.
So that's the unknown. So you ever go to get a leasehold property, you've got to look at the leasehold document of what's going to happen when that next term finishes, because that's key to it all. We saw one fairly recently. It was one that Hamish did a couple of years ago, and it had 3 incomes on it, and it was something. It was like I think it was $70,000 to buy roughly, and it was about $50,000 or $60,000 lease on it. But the rent was about $90,000, so the cash flow was actually really good. But the good thing about this one, it had I don't remember the term, but it was a really long term, like 20 years or something on the lease. Couldn't go up any more than 3% a year, which actually is not too bad. So actually, the figures on that actually were pretty good. And he got he didn't get a 70,000. I think actually sold for about 40 or something in the end. But it was a particularly pretty good cash flow deal for some amount of time. I've still got the problem of selling it one day, and that's why I'd never buy one. You've always got the problem of no matter what. There's very minimal people going to buy it.
Yeah, I think if you're buying it for the cash flows and it makes sense from that point of view, then it can work. I know a lot of the leasehold properties came up for sale around the America's Cup because I think owners thought they could get a premium for them, at that point in time.
Go to. It could cost you a bit more if you can negotiate what that lease will go to, and also the term that lease is going to go to as well.
Yeah, the term and how much it can go up if it sees is really important.
Yeah. I think probably in general, if you are looking at buying leasehold properties, then I think just approach with caution. If you don't know or don't understand how to read the leasehold documents, it's probably even more important to get a lawyer involved who does understand them and have a chat with them early on before you spend too much time and effort and money. And, in terms of inquiring about the property, I think kind of get involved, look at the lease. If it's something you don't understand, then, ask as many questions as you possibly can when you're getting involved. Like Mark says, from a cash flow point of view, these absolutely can work, but just be aware of the risks in terms of maybe what you're going into and make sure that you know sort of what you're signing up for. Any other last comments on this one?
No, just a good point you said is you use the right people for the right properties, and as you said, if you have your solicitor It's not the solicitor's fault. They specialise in one part of property or one part of law or whatever they do. But some don't know anything about leasehold. So if you don't, you don't have to use it. You have your solicitor, but if they don't know it, you use a specialist. The same as new builds. Is jumping into the next one, I guess. But if your solicitor doesn't, we see it all the time. Some solicitors don't understand new builds, and not their fault. They just don't deal with them, and then they get one on their desk. Where if you do one, you want to deal with one that understands them. Because
most professionals are pretty honest as well. I think if you ask them, outright and just say, look, is this something that you can help me with, or you think you're qualified, then they will sometimes potentially point you to someone else in their team, or even someone else who they know specializes in that area. It's just a matter of making sure you have the right advice when you're looking at something like this. Yeah,
especially if they're in a big firm, they get good advice. So
yeah. We've got another property. I'll just bring it up here, which is a new build. Just in the meanwhile, we've got a question: could the leasehold property be turned into a freehold? Lara, on that one, it really just comes down to whether or not the underlying ground could be purchased or not. So let's say, for example, because what you typically tend to have with leasehold properties is a different owner to the land for the land as the dwelling. So in this case, typical, you'll buy the dwelling, the underlying land you are basically renting, and that's why it's up for renewal over different terms. If in some rare cases you can find, I remember a deal years ago where it was actually something that Chris was working on, where you had a client who was buying the dwelling and effectively the leasehold property off one vendor, and the land off a different vendor. Now, the person who was selling the dwelling didn't know that the purchaser was actually negotiating to buy the land with the owner of the land, so the vendor on that side, and was able to actually put a really good deal together because they were able to get the dwelling at a good price as if it was leasehold property. But because they had the option to buy the land, they were effectively buying something that was almost freehold. So yes, you can do it in some cases. It's a lot harder in certain areas where you might have, for example, like viaduct properties, a prime example of that. We have certain types of land. We have landlords. It may be, Maori land, or it may potentially be a landlord that owns a significant proportion of the area who's just got no interest in selling you a little chunk. So it really just comes down to that particular property and what's available. Whereas, something like this, you might find that it may be its own separate title that a vendor's more than happy to let go of, because maybe they want the capital and they want to be able to do that rather than taking home 50 grand a year for owning the land. So it just comes down to doing your due diligence on the actual property itself. Yeah, and it just really say is, ask the question. If you do a little bit of work, sometimes you can make money in property, and this is one case. Is if you want to, just ask the question, ask the agent. Your agent might not know, but ask them, because they might know. If you don't, ask your solicitors. Someone find out who owns the land, and then you get in front of them and ask them. Now, as Ryan just said, a lot of places viaduct, you're never going to be able to buy the freehold land there. But I know, again, I'm going back when I was trading, so I'm going back probably 12 or 13 years ago. This area was one area where there was a chance with some of the properties that you could do that. Some were owned by schools and what have you, and they would sell the odd section off. So, it's well worthwhile asking that question. And as I said, you negotiate 2 deals. So it's pretty good. And there might be terms on that other one, how it might be over a period of time you'd buy it or whatever it is. Companies on the company's office, and it's pretty easy to find out often who's behind it. Yeah. There's a whole lot of useful data on websites like this, when they bought it, what they paid for it, back then, if it was listed, and by who. So you can see, for example, this one was listed in 2019 by the same owner, because this person's owned it since 2006. Now, whether or not there was a restructure or anything like that, you might be able to go and find that information online. And it's definitely something that wasn't, as readily available in years prior. So take use of what you can. Often, websites like this have very, very cheap memberships relative to what you can get back. So I believe APIA has something you can add to your membership to be able to obviously work further or closer with CoreLogic. So getting on to new builds, which obviously, the previous 2 properties, my comments kind of apply for existing properties and, the different tax implications on those. And again, have a chat to your accountant if you're looking at buying existing properties. But for new build properties, which obviously, Mark, you're a bit of an expert at, there's definitely, I've seen over the last little while in terms of funding, a lot more investors consider a new build property as an investment than perhaps what was the case in the past. And I think that's just because of some distortions that have happened with the amount of tax changes we've seen, in the new build space. So looking at this property here, I mean, you've got basically an asking price. It's obviously a lot more straightforward when you've got something like that. There's always a little bit of room for negotiation, particularly in a market like this one when there are asking prices. But obviously, you're basically looking at putting a 10% deposit down and then obviously, working towards a settlement at a later date. And there's a few things I will comment on in terms of the financing side of things there. But do you guys maybe want to throw in your thoughts around new build properties and what you think? So this one's here in Earlsworth Road in Mangere East.
You want to go first?
Yeah, so I guess, from a tax deductibility perspective, that's definitely a positive right now. But I've looked at new builds myself, and also in a downwards market with a fixed price, delays and it being finished. That's, I guess, a big risk in sort of holding that pre-approval lending.
Yeah.
But then new builds attract good tenants 9 times out of 10. You've got warranties, you've got less maintenance. So that's always a plus. And I think New Zealand is sort of tracking towards this sort of living, this sort of townhouse living away from your quarter acre dream now. So it's definitely got its positives, but again, in a market like this, and Ryan, you'll be able to talk more about it, just holding that lending and trying to ensure that it is going to be completed on time is a bit of a risk.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, great point you said there, and that's the thing right now. What we're seeing has been, people being scared off by the media. Just with there's been a lot of this is in the last 2.5 months or 3 months, a lot of stories from the developer that can't finish the project. I know one at the moment I'm involved in personally. We've got quite a few people that brought through it, and the developer basically run out of money. They've I believe just been got financed after about 4 months of it stalling, and then carrying on. So the finance has been, Brian knows more about that, but the finance has been incredibly hard for developers when it comes to refinancing time, or if there's been delays because of COVID. There's been delays more so because of the product, which is pretty well everyone knows about. Yep. And the price of it. So the delays and the prices have put money up. Developers don't have as much money. Well, it's costing more than they thought to develop, and they don't have the money. People walk off the job, they can't carry on. Pretty simple, and there's some good people, some good, some okay developers that have suffered because of that. Yeah. So find out about the developer, that they've done a few before, they've got money behind them, is pretty important right now, and probably more so than ever right now. And so that's one of the things you really want to search and do your research with. You're doing any development right now is find it's one of the biggest risk factors is that the money. Usually, if that ever happened or something happened and the project doesn't happen, or just saw one recently right in the middle of town, a very good developer. It's his 80th development that he's done. He's an incredibly good developer, really good name, quality build he does. And because of the market of where it is, they had no sales from November or December through to about a month ago. So he pulled the pin, and before they even started. And what happened then, as normally happens, everyone gets their deposit back. So bit of a bummer. They all would have liked to do it. The market's gone up a bit. They would have all been happy if it carried on, but it didn't. So that, usually I'll say the biggest risk is you'll get your money back. As a worst scenario, I've just seen a couple of contracts in the last 3 months of some developers, smaller developers, who are actually asking the purchase to release the deposit. And for me, that's dangerous. Because if it doesn't go ahead, you may not get your grumpy a couple of years ago when there was a particularly good deal, and some new investors actually and a home buyer. It was the best deal I've ever seen. I brought one myself, and because they didn't all get sold in the end, so I thought I'll buy one. And they got scared off because the solicitor, of course, is warning people about new builds and all the things that go wrong. And there's about bloody 20, 30, 40 pages of stuff that can go wrong, so there's a lot to tell. And unless you're know that or respecting that, you can get scared off by it. Where if you get a solicitor that knows about it, they'll say these are the risks, but hey, this is the risk factor on this, and then you go through and make the decision, sort of thing. So just with that, so the developer is really important, and the contract's really important with any new build. One thing Dale just said before, with you might be able to negotiate a little bit. Some developers you can't. What you can do is, even I know how some of the developers we work with, for example, in the past year, they start off low, then they get the pre-sales or so many, they put the price up. I don't think this particular developer does that so much, but what we'll probably do, as you said, you probably can negotiate. We usually can't, quite often you can't with developers. You might be able to negotiate a wee bit. Especially
in this market, I think.
Especially in this market. Just for example, we would do with Alexandra Park apartments at the moment, next lot. They've come out with some incredible deals until they get their pre-sale number, which I know what it is. Yeah. And so that sort of happens. So if this is in the infancy, there's 78 or something? 79 properties, 76, I think it is. So if there's only 5 are sold, there might be some good deals to be done. If there's 50 are sold, well, it's not going to be, but it still looks like a very good, they build well-designed apartment of terraced houses. Yeah. It should be a good terrace house. There's a lot of good things about it. It looks like a bit of land. It's not as if they haven't built any off the plan stuff before. They've done a lot.
Yeah, of course, done a few.
And you do your own research. Decide where you think they're financially good or not. And so there's a lot of good things about them. And it's a good area, very good area for this sort of property for owners and rental demand. So it's a particularly good area, close to a lot of things down that part of the a part of it. So
I'd probably look at maybe just a couple of comments that I'd make. One is, if you're ever looking at, I suppose, and this applies to every property that we've gone through tonight, and probably anything that you look at as a buyer, is always get an independent rental appraisal, just to make sure that what's being marketed with, particularly new build properties. Obviously, market rental appraisals with them if they're trying to target investors in this sort of market, because the market's been skewed. But just in general, for anything that you look at, try and get a rental appraisal, maybe from a company that isn't associated with the person selling it, just so that you can make sure that there's a level of independence there and that you know what the market's doing, and maybe compare that to tenancy data that you can find online on government websites, just to make sure that if you are running numbers on yields and things like that you're making an educated decision and that there isn't any bias. You might find the original appraisal is absolutely correct, but you want to do that check, and for the sake of 5 minutes extra work, it's worth it.
Really, really important with that, because some bigger companies such as Devel, and I'm not sure they still do it or not, but they some companies like that, they have their own in-house rental division, and if they do that, they not saying they do, but they could do it, take it up $30-40 more than $50 more than it should be. Yep. And so you won't find that out unless you do it, Ryan just said. So do that, because they might be looking after it for 2 years, they may be looking after it for 10 years, and depends what they might have a guaranteed rent for whatever years, but make sure that's sustainable, and rents do go up. So if you've got a guaranteed rental for 3 or 5 years, take that in consideration. But if it's $100 more than what it is, but be careful with dealing with one apartment, something similar to this, I guess.
I think,
and also
rent's not as good as it was 2 years ago.
And also if you're already using a property manager, possibly that property manager that you're going to use as well, and sort of try and track it for completion date as well, looking at historical figures on what rents have done and the thought of where they're tracking for the future, because they're not always just going to keep tracking up, so just to be a bit conservative in that aspect as well.
Yeah, I mean, on that, something important, which Nick, you touched on a little bit earlier, is just around the financing side. There's probably a couple of things that I'd comment on. First is going to be around this deposit, and then the second will just be around the time frame in terms of which it's going to take to complete. So they kind of allude to that here. Now, a couple of things. One is, if you're looking at the deposit, a question we often will tend to get asked, I've written a blog on it as well, which basically is, how come an agent or a developer tells me I can pay 10%, but you guys are telling me I have to pay more? For example, a 20% deposit. which is what's required for investment property new builds at the moment. The key difference, of course, is that just because you can get a 10% deposit upon signing doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to qualify for a loan that's, let's say, 90%. It's not the agent or the developer that gives you the loan, it's the bank. So you have to make sure that, what they're saying in terms of what you need to do to go unconditional isn't confused with what you're able to get from a financing point of view. So if you are unsure about what you might be able to get, then obviously get in touch with someone who can help. Obviously we can. It's the kind of thing that there definitely have been opportunities for people to buy new build investment properties with only a 10% deposit, and banks were doing up to 90% at one point in time. It was extremely hard to get and very rare, and for the most part happened quite a while ago as opposed to happening only in the last few years. Something else which I think is probably more important even than that is just around the timeframes. First of all, there's no bank or non-bank approval in the market that lasts more than 12 months. So if you're buying a new build property, it'll last for, let's say you got an approval today, it would last for 12 months. If you're expecting this settlement to be, let's say, 13 months or even more, let's say up to 24, then you're doing that on the basis that you're willing to take a risk. Now, you can run a few checks, and we can sit there and say today, okay, look, it looks very likely that you could get pre-approved. But however, things can change a lot in the financing market, as they have done over the last 12 to 24 months. So just because you can qualify today, it doesn't necessarily mean that you will be able to get that in the future. And a bank is under no obligation to, give you the loan in 24 months' time if they approved you for 12 months today. So just be aware that the market can change. And if you are willing to take those risks, you'll want to have a few different options for what's called exit strategies on the way out. If you got into a new build property and for whatever reason were unable to settle it because you couldn't get finance or couldn't come up with the cash or sell another property or something like that, then you might want to consider things like whether you're happy to on-sell the property, take a loss if you have to on the other end, and how much you're willing to lose, for example, maybe your deposit, and just sort of factor in those worst case scenarios, because going in without a guarantee of finance in any market is risky, but particularly in one like this one where there's not 100% certainty on where property prices will be in the next little while. Another point as well is many of you will know that certain banks brought out really, really good build products. So interest rates, which at the time when they came out were in the high 1%, and then tracked up towards 2 and now early 3%, which is still a lot better than what the market does at the moment or does offer. Don't do all of your numbers on interest rates that low. It's something we said quite a while ago, even when standard interest rates were that low. You have to take a long-term view to your property. I know a guy I was speaking to recently who bought a property on the basis that he could get one of these interest rates in the 2s or 3s from a bank, which was ASB at the time, and they're no longer offering that product. Now, fortunately, ANZ still are as at today, and that particular purchaser will be fine. However, realistically speaking, if ANZ pulled that, let's say tomorrow, then budgeting on a 3% interest rate and budgeting on, what might be a 5.5% to 6% interest rate by the time this settles could be very, very different and may have completely changed your opinion on whether or not you wanted to buy that said property. So always work on numbers that are higher than what the current market does. When I first got in, when you're buying a property, particularly if you're buying it for the long term and not for something that you're going to hold for, let's say, 6 or 12 months. So just make sure you understand what it's going to mean to own a property long term, and don't do numbers on a basis that's too aggressive where you could only, make things work on, let's say, a 2% interest rate, because that's probably not the best way to do things long term.
Yeah, no, that worst case scenario is a brilliant thing to think about, and everyone thinks it's never going to happen. Yeah, believe me, it does happen. I've experienced it a couple of times. So have that worst case scenario sorted out.
And it sucks when you have to experience them from your own doing, right?
Yeah,
but without listening to everyone else. So
so listen to everyone else and don't do it. That's one thing you keep highlighting on one thing there. I hate in that ad. It says could be ready in 1 or 2 years. I mean, right at this point when you advertise, you should be known when it's due to be finished. And I'm sure Devel Group have told them when it's going to be finished. But that's not a good look. But anyway.
Yeah, I think it's just having a discussion with the developer, trying to figure out, what works. And one other comment I will make with properties, new build properties in general, as Mark said, you want to speak to a solicitor who specialises in your capability to be able to buy it. You at least want the ability to pull out from a legal perspective. So it's just about understanding what those sunset clauses mean and having a lawyer who can look out for them and explain them to you if you are unsure about what those are.
I just jump in there, Ryan. Really interesting enough, and I've just exactly what you've said. I've preached for years and years because you could always get. In fact, for years, if we didn't have that sunset clause in the advantage of the purchaser, we would go back and say, hey, we don't like this, change it. But in the last 6 months, or 6 months, 8 months, every single, and I've seen a lot, every sale and purchase agreement from a developer we've had, it's a general clause, and so it suits. It's either party can go out, so can pull out at. But now there's a lot of pressure on developers not to do that, and most still won't. They're going to use it for the proper reason it's really there for, I guess. But what I'm trying to say is the last 6 months, every developer that I've seen sale and purchase agreements had a general sunset clause for both parties, which could be dangerous. Then you go back to again is two things. One, as I said right at the start, check out the developer. No, they're a good developer. Most developers that I've seen this, I'll go, no qualms, they're never going to cancel the agreements. They're just not going to. The reputation's way too big for that. But the other thing is you can do, and I know some developers will have, and I've seen them sign off on it, they get their solicitor to change the sale and purchase agreement to say that it only that only the purchaser can actually pull out because of the sunset clause. So again, it's just little things. So ask the question, but don't be surprised if you see.
It's going to be a big amount, but it's a thing, right? These rising costs that we've got. So. And
it's horrible what's happened this time around, but there has been real costs. And one development itself, a very good developer, and he went back and asked the people for money, and they weren't very happy to start off with. Pretty disappointing, we'll say, in a nice way, but in the end they actually got it. And all those buyers in that particular development have all made at least $200,000, and we're talking about $30,000 extra. So I guess what fair is fair legally, whatever, but also, why should 19 people make $200,000 each, and the developer loses money when he was doing the best job he could for those people? It swings around. And you can say, hard luck on the developer, because they usually make millions on each development. Yeah, it's just points to thrown out there. It's tough.
Yeah.
Been a tough market we've just seen and been through the last 6 months.
Oh, cool. Well, I think we'll wrap up unless you guys have any other comments on these properties. If anyone does have any questions, or maybe wants to ask us any other things, I'm sure Serena can pass on our details. So just hope everyone enjoyed and learnt a little bit on maybe what we look for as investors when we are looking at making offers on properties. Obviously, these properties are all quite different. Going from something with just a dual income to a leasehold to a new build, and the things that you look for can be slightly different. But I think probably the most important thing is just making sure that, if necessary and you're unsure about anything at all, and it's something new that you haven't approached before, is that you ask questions, get people around you who know what they're doing. And I think for the most part, in a lot of these examples, a solicitor is someone who's instrumental, and having someone who knows, different niche properties better than others is going to probably be the thing that saves you if you do find yourself in a real tough situation.
Yep.
So thanks everyone for joining us, and have a good evening. Thanks a lot, Nick and Mark.
Sweet.
Good.
See you later.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate your time.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.